Okay guys, now we're going to learn about functions in Python. In my opinion, this is another very exciting episode because we can unlock more capability in our programs. Just like before when we learned about if statements and loops, that allowed our programs to become more dynamic. Functions allows our programs to become more complex overall. So a function is simply a reusable block of code. So very often in your programs, you're going to be doing the same thing multiple times. So you can have a block of code that does something very complex potentially. So we'll give you a basic example. Let's just say print hello world, right? Let's pretend that this is a block of code, right? Just a bunch of code that does something very specific. If we want to do it multiple times, we would take the whole block of code, copy it, and paste it, right? But then you're just duplicating code. So it'd be nice if you could just define it once somewhere, give it a name, and then just use it. So that is what a function is all about. So for example, let's define our first function. We're going to use def for define, and then we're going to give our function a name. So we're going to call it greet function, doing an opening and closing parentheses, and do a colon. And then within here is going to be all the code of the function. So we're going to say in our case, print hello world. So what this has done here is we've created a reusable piece of code called greet. It's the function called greet. And whenever we invoke greet, which I'll show you in a second, it's going to run this piece of code here, or any code that you have inside of it. So we can print out peanut as well. So anything that you have inside the function that's indented properly, it will be ran whenever the function is called. So now anytime we want to greet someone in our program, we don't have to copy this code, and paste it every single time. That gets pretty annoying and leads to issues. So now we can reuse it. So once you have your function defined, you can call a function or invoke a function by just calling it. So greet, press tab to autocomplete, and then make sure that you do the opening and closing parentheses. So this is defining a function, and this is invoking or calling a function. So if we run the program now, boom, we get hello world peanut. If I comment this out, if I run it again, nothing happens because all we're doing is defining the function. So it only runs this code when we actually call the function. So now with that reusability in mind, if I want to greet somebody multiple times in our program, we just simply call the function again. We don't have to call all this code that could be inside the function. So if I run it, I get it 4 times now. Looks good. So anytime you want to reuse some code, make a function for it, and then you can call the function anytime you want. But we can also make functions more dynamic by accepting parameters. What this means is that we can make the functions accept input. So we're going to make a new function, def, and we're going to call this one greet person, and this one's going to take in a parameter called name. And then give it a colon, and then enter. This name here is called a parameter. And so now anytime you call the greetPerson function, you have to pass in a value for this parameter, and it's going to be used in the function potentially. You don't have to, but that's usually what it's for. So now that we have that, we can do, for example, print, and we'll say something like hello name. So this is way more dynamic, as you can see, than the first one, because this one always runs the same code, which is fine. You're going to have functions that commonly just run the same code no matter what. But if you want your functions to take in data to do stuff with it more dynamically, you can do it with parameters. So let's call it, we're going to do greet person. If you don't pass in the parameter, it's going to tell you argument missing for parameter. So we're going to pass in the value for that parameter. We're going to say potato. So now let's run it and see what we get. So we get hello world and then hello potato. Nice. And we can change it to whatever we want. So let's just say Cody. Let's just say Mr. Beans. That's my cat's name. Let's run it again. Now we get hello potato, hello Cody, hello Mr. Beans, and we didn't have to write the code inside of here. This is very cool, right? This is why I was saying at the beginning that this is very exciting, because we can unlock a lot more capability with our code. So these functions that we have that we can define parameters for can actually take in multiple parameters. So we can do define, and let's call this one add numbers. So this one's going to take in num1 and num2. And first we're going to calculate the sum of that since we're trying to add. So we're going to do sum is equal to num1 plus num2, and then we're going to print out the result. So we're saying sum of num1 and num2 is equal to sum. There we go. So now whenever we call the add numbers function, we need to pass in 2 numbers. They're going to be added together, and we're going to print out the result of that summing operation. So let's do add numbers, and we're going to say -69 and 2. Let's see what we get. There we go. We get sum of -69 and 2 is -67. We can try it again. Let's do add numbers. Let's say 5 and 10. We should get 15. There we go. We get 15. Nice. So I really hope this is making sense so far. So first we learned how to create functions, which is reusable pieces of code with a name. Then we learned how we can use parameters to provide input to functions. And now we just learned that we can provide multiple parameters to our functions to take even more data if we want to. And just a little bit more clarification on the terminology. Whenever you define your function like we're doing here or here, this is called a parameter, like I said. But then when you're actually invoking the function and you're passing in the data, this is called an argument. So, but usually parameters used for both terms. Like you can say, like, I'm just going to pass in -69 for the first parameter and then 2 for the second parameter. People are not going to be like, oh, you're supposed to say argument. Like, no one cares. Another thing to keep note of is that, Python runs from top to bottom as we've learned. So make sure that before you call your function, you have to define the function. So for example, you can't invoke the function if it has not been defined yet, because as the program is running from top to bottom, it's going to come here and say, okay, I need to run add numbers, but add numbers has not been defined at this point in time. So that's just something you have to be aware of. You can also call functions within functions. So if we wanted to, we could call greet person inside of add numbers. I don't think you would ever want to do that, but just as an example, we can call greet person and pass in, either a name, or we can pass in the sum, whatever you want. It's just to illustrate that you can do that. So if I run it, I get hello 15. Nice. Let's do another example. I think it's good to get a lot of practice. So we'll do define, describe, person. We're going to let's pass in 3 arguments this time. We'll do a name, an age, and a city. And let's say something like, before I told you, right, anything that's indented inside of this function here can be part of the function. It doesn't have to be as simple as just printing out or, summing, right? We can literally have whatever code that we've learned how to do so far. So for example, let's just say if the age is, let's just say, how about if the city is equal to Dallas? If the city is equal to Dallas, we're going to say something cool like, wow, he's from Dallas. Something that's really dumb, really dumb. So we'll say else, he isn't from Dallas. He sucks. These are horrible examples, but the point is that you can run whatever code you want inside of here. So after that, we can then do something like, let's just say name is age, years old, and lives in city. Okay, so now if we call describe person, we're going to pass in Alice. Alice is 35 or 25, and we'll say she's from New York. And then we'll call it again. We'll say describe person, Tex. He's 30 and he's from Dallas. Let's see what happens when we run these 2 pieces of code. Okay, so we get, here we go. He isn't from Dallas. He sucks. Alice is 25 years old and lives in New York. While he's from Dallas, Tex is 30 years old and lives in Dallas. So cool. Before we move on to the challenge, before I told you guys about the main benefit of functions, which is reusability, we can define a chunk of code as a function, give it a name, and we can reuse it anywhere multiple times without having to copy the same code over and over. So if we were to list the benefits, the first one would be reusability for sure. But there's 2 other ones. So the second one is going to be organization. So with the types of programs that we're writing currently, it's just a wall of code from top to bottom, and it gets hard to read the more complex the programs will get. So functions also allow us to break pieces of code or chunks of code that are related to do one specific thing into a function so that it's in its own little place. So the program is a little bit more organized, it's more readable because you can see, like, oh, this piece of code's for this, based on the function name, etc. It just also breaks up the program into smaller, more logical parts that you can work with more easily, okay? So reusability, organization, and the last one's going to be maintainability. I don't know if I even spelled that correctly, but maintainability. This one kind of builds upon organization. So if instead of having a wall of text or of code, we have everything broken up into its own little pieces, if we ever want to refactor something in our code, change something, remove something, add something, it's a little bit easier to find it if we can just go to the function called greet, because we know that's going to have the code related to greeting. Or if we know there's a problem in our program with adding, we know to go probably to our add numbers function because that's where the adding logic is defined. Secondly, for maintainability, since the code of the function is only defined in the function definition and not every time you invoke it, if we ever want to change something in the greet person function, we only have to change it in one place. We don't have to change it everywhere it's called. If we did not have functions in programming, every time we want to change something with how we greet someone, we would have to find every single place that we have that code, which is obviously not smart or ideal, or that's just crazy, right? So that is another reason that functions have a big benefit to them. So those are the benefits of functions: reusability, organization, and maintainability. All right, let's do a fun little challenge here so we can actually test what we learned so far. And this will use some of the things that we learned in the previous episodes too. So we're going to be building a simple shopping list manager. So the task is to create a shopping list manager using functions. The program should be relatively simple, okay? So you have a shopping list just like you have when you go to the store. And so you need a way to add items to the shopping list by their name, remove items by their name from the shopping list once you bought them potentially, or you changed your mind. And then also you need a way, obviously, to view the items on your shopping list so you can view it. So we want to make a program that can allow you to do that. And then point four is very important. We want to keep this program running in a loop continually until the user decides to quit the program. So we're going to keep allowing the user to do these three actions here until they decide to quit the program. And you can define how you want that to be. Usually they would just type quit, for example. That's how you can do something like that. So I didn't get too specific, so you have some freedom on how you want to implement this, of course, and you'll see how it differs from my implementation. So have fun with it. And here's some hints though before we get started. So in terms of storing items, obviously you can use a list. I did explain that already, but use an actual Python list because we want to keep track of all the items together. And then for each of the things that we want to do, such as adding, removing, and viewing the shopping list, let's use a function for each of those things. That way it's in its own place like we talked about, and you can call them easily. And then also finally, for repeating, continually until they decide to quit, that's a perfect use case for the while loop. So I really hope this makes sense. Go ahead and try pausing the video, attempting this on your own, and seeing how your results differs from mine. So I'll see you in 1 second. All right, let's do it. So first of all, let me go up here and just comment all this out. I don't want this to interfere with our program here. And we're going to start by saying, welcome to the shopping list manager. And then now we're going to let's define a few things. So first of all, we need to keep track of the items in our shopping list. So we're going to use a list for that. And initially it's going to be empty because obviously we have no items to start with. And then now we want to define the functions for these three actions here. So adding, removing, and viewing, okay? I'll start with adding. So define, and we'll call it add item. And what you want to do is pass in the item that you want to add to our shopping list. So we're going to say item. And now we want to add the item passed in as a parameter to our shopping list. And if you remember, you can do that by using shopping list dot, and we have all these functions here, these methods, and we can call append. So append is appending an object to the end of the list. Let's run that, append, and pass an item. So that's going to add it, and we'll just confirm that. That's always good to have confirmation messages. So we'll put in quotes here. So item to your shopping list. So that's it for the add item function. Pretty simple. Let's do another one. So let's do remove item. We're going to pass in the item name again. So now we need to remove the item from the shopping list. How can we do that with Python? So let's go to shopping list and let's see what we have. So first of all, we have pop. So pop says remove and return item at index. So this one wouldn't really work for us because you have to specify the index of where the item is. We could use it if we get the index, but there's actually another one we could use, which is remove. Remove the first occurrence of value, raises value error if the value is not present. So this one's more suitable for what we need because we have the item that we want to remove here. We're passing in as a parameter, and then now we're going to pass that in to the remove function or method. But we learned that, like it says here, it raises a error if the value is not present in the list. So that's not good. We obviously don't want an error in our program because our program will crash. So to handle that, let's cut this, Control X. We can do if, and first we're going to check to see if the item is in the list or not. And we can do that very easily by doing if item in shopping list. So this returns true if the item is in the shopping list, otherwise false. So if it's true, we're going to remove it, otherwise else. So if the item is not in the list, we're simply going to say print not in shopping list. And then we're going to copy that. And then if it is removed successfully, we're going to say removed from shopping list. Nice. So just to reiterate, we're going to call the remove item function. We're going to pass in an item. We're going to check to see first if the item is actually in the list. If it is, then we're going to remove it from the list. And then we're going to print out the confirmation. Otherwise, if it's not on the list, we're just going to tell the user not in shopping list, and then don't call the function, because if we do, we get an exception, which we don't want, or an error. Okie dokie, so the last one we're going to do is view shopping list. And for this, we don't need to pass anything into it, because we already have access to the list here above. So first, what I'm going to do is do if not shopping list. That's kind of weird, but what this will do, if I haven't shown you before, is it'll return true if the shopping list is empty. If it is not empty, this will return false. So it's just an easy way to check to see if a list is empty or not. So if it's empty, we're simply going to tell them it's empty. So your shopping list is empty. Otherwise, if it's not empty, then now we want to go through each of the items in the list and print them out one by one. So let's figure out the best way we can do that. So ideally, if you have a list on paper, maybe you would have something like this, like blah, 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 something like that. Or we can even number it. So 1, 2, a list like that. So we kind of have to go back and remember how can we loop through a list in Python. And that's usually going to be done with a for loop. So we can do, for example, for item in shopping list. this will loop for however many items are in the shopping list, and for each item, it's going to give you a variable that you can use in each iteration. So we could say, for example, print, let's use string formatting, and we'll say item. So now for every item in the shopping list, it's going to print a dash and then put the item name. So like this. But like I just said, we want it to be numbered. So if we want this to be numbered, you can still use a for loop because that's how you loop through stuff. But instead of just directly calling the shopping list, we want to wrap it with enumerate. And with enumerate, this gives us two items that we can use for the loop. So instead of just item, it's going to be index and item. And then now we can go here to our string and do index. So for each iteration of this loop, it'll be 1 dot the name and then 2 dot the name and so on. However, though, one little trick that you have to remember is that if you hover over the name of the function, it starts at 0, it's 0 based. So it's really going to be 0 name, 1 name. That's not very, humans don't write numbers like that. So to start it at 1, we can simply do two things. We can add on to it like that, or we can just pass in 1 for the start right here. So this is a parameter that we're passing a number into. So hopefully stuff like this makes a little bit more sense. When we call these methods and these functions, you can now understand like what a function is, but also we're passing in a parameter, which is cool. So now it's going to be 1, 2, 3, and so on. All right, so now we have the three first requirements. We have the ability to add, remove, and view. So now we need to set it up so that we can actually call these functions and set up the loop of the program so that the user can decide what they want to call and also quit. So I gave you a hint before that we can use a while loop for that. So all we're going to do is say while true. That's an infinite loop, and I told you that you need to be careful with infinite loops, and that's still true. You just need to make sure that you have a way to actually exit out of the loop, and that's what we need to make sure that we do. So first of all, we want to present the user with a list of options. So let's just say something like print, new line, add, remove, view, and quit. So if you want to, you could give them more detailed descriptions of what these things do, but I think overall they're pretty self-explanatory. Those are the options, and then we want to present the user also with a choice. So input, choose, and option. And then based on the options, we'll say, first of all, if the choice is equal to quit, then we're going to go in and break. We're going to break out of the loop. So this is our way out of the loop. So it's going to run forever. It's infinite. But if I do quit, we'll break out of the loop. We'll also say goodbye. So else if they decide, let's just say choice is equal to add. If they decide they want to add to the list, we can then call our add function. So above we called it add item. So we're going to call add item. But the thing is though, this requires a parameter or an argument to a parameter, which is the item, right? So we need to ask the user what item they want to add to the list. So we're going to say item is equal to input, enter an item to add to the shopping list. So we're going to take that input from the user. It's going to be a string, which is good. Then we're going to pass that string into the add item function call so that we're going to add it to our shopping list up here. And then under that, we don't need to say item added because in the function, we've already done that. So we still have two more to do. So remove and view. So let's copy this here. And we'll say remove, enter an item to remove from the shopping list. And then we're going to call remove item instead. So if they type in view, we're then going to just simply do view shopping list. And we don't need to pass anything in, which is good. And we could leave it like this if we want to, but you have to remember something. What happens when they don't provide these four options? Because in a realistic program, people are going to do the wrong thing, right? So we have to think about stuff like that. What happens when someone does not choose one of the options that we want? In this case, what we can do is just add an else. So we'll say else if none of these conditions matched, so they did not choose one of our four options, we're just going to tell them print invalid option, try again. So it's going to say invalid option, try again, and then at this point it's the end of the while loop. So it's just going to go back to the top here and say present the options again and ask them their option. So it's just going to loop over and over until they do it correctly, which is what we want. And that's it. I really hope this makes sense. So I think now it's time to actually test it out. Let's run it and see what we get. Okay, cool. So welcome to the shopping list manager. Options add, remove, view, and quit. So we'll say something like fart. Invalid option, try again. Add, remove, view, and quit. Let's just say view. So your shopping list is empty. Okay, let's add something. And we're going to say spaghetti. Spaghetti noodles. So added spaghetti noodles to your shopping list. Let's make sure it's there, view. Nice, it says 1 spaghetti noodles. Cool. Let's add some sauce to the list. So sauce. Okay, we got some sauce on there. Nice. Let's add some meatballs. Meatballs. Nice. Cool. Actually, I don't want meatballs, so I'm going to do remove meatballs. View. Boom. Now we have spaghetti noodles and sauce. And I'm done. So I'm going to go to the store now and buy those things. Then I'm done. So I'm going to type quit. Goodbye. Nice. As you can see, it worked perfectly, which is cool. I really hope you guys learned a lot and had fun making this program. It's cool to see that we can actually do cool stuff other than just printing like we do above. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. And that's it for this episode, guys. Now you learned how to do functions within Python. They're very powerful. It's a way to reuse code by creating a function, giving it a name, and then you can invoke the function as many times as you want. So it's a very cool thing that we can do. You can also do parameters to pass in data and use those. Next time we're going to learn how to return data from functions using return. So stay tuned for that. See you guys next time, and peace.